The silence of Blackwood Manor was not empty, it was heavy. It pressed against the silk wallpaper of the East drawing-room, weighted down by 3 centuries of accumulated wealth and the stern portraits of matriarchs who stared down with oil-painted judgment. Eleanor Blackwood stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching the rain lash against the glass. The Hudson Valley was drowning in a gray storm, the rolling hills of her family's estate reduced to ghostly shapes in the mist. At 26, Eleanor was the sole heir to the Blackwood fortune, a staggering portfolio of shipping lines and real estate that made her one of the most powerful women on the eastern seaboard. Yet, in this room, she felt less like a CEO and more like a porcelain doll kept in a cabinet. "Miss Blackwood." The voice was soft, barely threading through the sound of the rain. Eleanor didn't turn immediately. She knew who it was. The rhythm of those footsteps, light, hesitant, yet purposeful, had become the only interesting thing in this mausoleum of a house. "Yes, Clara." Eleanor turned. Clara stood in the doorway, holding a silver tray with a porcelain tea set. She was new, having only been at the manor for a month. She wore the uniform, stark black dress, white apron, hair pinned back severely, but she wore it with a kind of quiet rebellion. A wisp of chestnut hair always escaped near her temple. Her eyes, a startling, intelligent hazel, didn't lower as quickly as a servant's should. "Your afternoon tea, Mississippi Margaret insisted you take it in here today." "Margaret insists on a great many things," Eleanor murmured, stepping away from the window. Margaret was her mother, the current matriarch, a woman made of steel wire and pearl necklaces. "Set it down, please." Clara moved to the low mahogany table. Eleanor watched her hands. They were red from the cold water of the scullery, rougher than Eleanor's manicured fingers, but steady. There was a mesmerizing grace in the way Clara poured the Darjeeling. The steam curled up, bridging the distance between them. "Is the fire to your liking, miss?" Clara asked, straightening up. "It's fine," Eleanor said, though the room felt freezing. She walked closer, entering Clara's orbit. The scent of rain and beeswax soap clung to the maid. It was the smell of the real world, a world Eleanor watched from behind glass. "Actually, no. It's cold. Would you stoke it?" "Of course." Clara knelt before the hearth. Eleanor watched the curve of her spine, the tension in her shoulders. It was an abuse of power, perhaps, to make her stay longer, but Eleanor was starving for something living. "Where are you from, Clara?" Clara paused, the poker in her hand. She looked back over her shoulder, surprised. The staff was rarely addressed beyond commands. "Rhode Island, Mississippi. A small town near Newport." "Newport," Eleanor mused. "We summer there. I suppose you know the cliffs." "I know the service entrances of the houses on the cliffs," Clara said, a sharp edge to her voice that she quickly softened. "My mother was a seamstress for the Vanderbilts." Eleanor smiled, a genuine, rare expression that softened the aristocratic angles of her face. "And you? Do you plan to be a maid forever, Clara?" Clara turned back to the fire, stabbing a log with unnecessary force. Sparks flew up like fireflies. "I plan to survive, Miss Blackwood. Ambition is a luxury for the wealthy." The retort hung in the air, dangerous and thrilling. No one spoke to Eleanor like that. Everyone else treated her as an institution, a bank account with a heartbeat. "Ambition is a curse, Clara," Eleanor said, her voice dropping to a whisper. She took a step closer. "It turns you into a statue before you're even dead." Clara stood up, dusting off her hands. She was close now. Eleanor could see the flecks of gold in her hazel eyes. The air between them crackled, charged with a sudden, unexplained electricity. For a second, just a second, the social chasm between the heiress and the maid vanished, replaced by the terrifying proximity of 2 women who saw each other. "I should go," Clara breathed, her composure cracking. "Wait," Eleanor said. She reached out, her fingers grazing Clara's wrist. The contact was electric. Clara flinched but didn't pull away. Eleanor's thumb brushed the pulse point. It was hammering like a trapped bird. "You missed a spot." Eleanor reached up and tucked the loose wisp of chestnut hair behind Clara's ear. It was an intimate, possessive gesture. Clara stopped breathing. "Thank you, miss," Clara whispered. "Eleanor," she corrected. "When we are alone, Call me Eleanor." Clara's eyes widened. She pulled her hand away gently, bobbing a quick, flustered curtsy. "I couldn't, Mississippi Margaret, your mother, she would have my head." She turned and fled the room, the heavy oak doors closing with a thud that echoed in Eleanor's chest. 2 weeks passed. The manor was a hive of activity. The annual Blackwood Winter Gala was approaching, an event that drew the most elite women of American society. Senators, heiresses, and tycoons would descend upon the estate to drink champagne and broker power. Eleanor hated it. She spent her days in board meetings via video call and her evenings being critiqued by her mother. "Stand straight, Eleanor," Margaret snapped one evening in the library. "You are the face of this family. You cannot look like you are carrying the weight of the world, even if you are." Margaret Blackwood was a terrifying woman. She sat in a high-backed leather chair, sipping brandy. "And that new girl, Clara. She's clumsy. I saw her drop a napkin in the dining hall. I'm thinking of letting her go before the gala." Eleanor's blood ran cold. "No." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "No." "She's efficient," Eleanor lied, her heart racing. "She cleans the delicate antiques better than the others. I trust her with my sweet. Keep her on. For me." Margaret studied her daughter for a long, agonizing moment. "Very well. But keep her out of sight during the party. We can't have mistakes." When Margaret finally retired for the night, Eleanor remained in the library. The room was vast, filled with thousands of books and the smell of old paper. She couldn't sleep. The threat of losing Clara had terrified her more than the collapse of a stock index. Around midnight, a noise startled her. The creak of a ladder sliding along the brass rail. "Who's there?" Eleanor demanded, standing up from her armchair. A figure froze at the top of the ladder in the shadows of the upper stacks. "It's me, Mississippi. I thought everyone was asleep." Clara descended slowly. She wasn't in her uniform. She wore a simple white cotton nightgown covered by a fraying woolen shawl. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders in loose waves. She looked younger, softer, and breathtakingly beautiful. In her hand, she clutched a book. "Stealing, Clara?" Eleanor asked, walking over. She wasn't angry. She was enchanted. "Borrowing," Clara corrected defensively, clutching the book to her chest. "I always put them back before dawn. I didn't think you'd be here." "What are you reading?" Clara hesitated, then handed the book over. "Wuthering Heights." Eleanor smiled sadly. "A story about love that destroys everything it touches." "It's a story about passion that transcends class," Clara countered, her chin tilting up. "Heathcliff and Catherine, they were souls made of the same stuff." "And what are we made of, Clara?" The question slipped out before Eleanor could stop it. The library seemed to shrink, the walls closing in until the world consisted only of the circle of lamplight they stood in. Clara stepped closer, emboldened by the lateness of the hour and the lack of uniform. "You are made of gold and silk, Miss Blackwood." "And I am made of dust and work." "Don't," Eleanor whispered. She dropped the book on a nearby table. "Don't say that. It's the truth." "I don't care about the truth." Eleanor took a step forward, closing the gap. "I care about this." She reached out and took Clara's hands. They were cold. Eleanor raised them to her lips, kissing the rough knuckles, her eyes never leaving Clara's. Clara let out a shaky gasp, her fingers curling around Eleanor's. "Eleanor," Clara whispered, testing the name. It sounded like a prayer. "I saved your job today," Eleanor murmured against Clara's skin. "Mother wanted to fire you." Clara stiffened. "Why?" "Because I asked her not to. Because I couldn't bear the thought of this house without you in it." Clara pulled her hands away, stepping back, her expression torn between desire and fear. "Do you know what happens if we get caught? You get a scandal. I get nothing. I lose my home, my reference, my future. We are not playing the same game." "Then let's change the rules," Eleanor said fiercely. "I am the Blackwood heir. I own this house. I own this town, practically. I can protect you." "You can't protect me from your mother," Clara said, her voice trembling. And you can't protect yourself from who you are. Clara turned to run, but Eleanor caught her arm. She spun Clara around, and in the momentum, they crashed together. Eleanor didn't think. She acted on a month of repressed longing. She cupped Clara's face and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative first kiss. It was desperate, fueled by the storm outside and the silence inside. Clara froze for a heartbeat, then melted. She made a small, wounded sound and wrapped her arms around Eleanor's neck, pulling her closer. The taste of her was simple and sweet, like rainwater and tea. For a moment, the heavy portraits and the legacy of the Blackwoods ceased to exist. They broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting against each other. I won't let her fire you, Eleanor vowed, her voice rough. I promise. Clara's eyes were wet. You can't promise that. Watch me. The night of the winter gala arrived in a flurry of snow and diamonds. The ballroom was transformed into a winter wonderland, dripping with crystals and white roses. An orchestra played waltzes while women in couture gowns swirled across the floor. Eleanor stood on the dais, wearing a gown of emerald velvet that cost more than a house. She shook hands, smiled at investors, and accepted compliments from the governor's wife. She felt like she was suffocating. Her eyes scanned the periphery of the room. The staff moved like shadows, refilling champagne glasses and clearing plates. She spotted Clara near the heavy velvet curtains of the terrace doors. Clara caught her eye. A look passed between them, a secret burning thread connecting the heiress on the stage to the maid in the shadows. Eleanor stopped staring at the help. Margaret hissed in her ear. Mrs. Vanderveer is waiting to be introduced. Eleanor turned, plastering a smile on her face. Of course, mother. The night dragged on. The air grew hot and stifling. Around 11 p.m., the orchestra began a slow, melancholic piece. Eleanor couldn't take it anymore. She whispered an excuse to the senator's daughter she was speaking with and slipped away toward the terrace doors. She found Clara outside, shivering in the winter air, clearing a tray of abandoned glasses. The snow was falling softly, muffling the world. You're freezing, Eleanor said, stepping out. The cold bit through her velvet dress, but she didn't care. Clara jumped. Miss Eleanor, you shouldn't be out here. Someone will see. Let them see, Eleanor said recklessly. She took the heavy tray from Clara's hands and set it on the stone balustrade. I hate them. All of them. Their fake laughter, their obsession with lineage. It's all rot. It's your life, Clara said softly, hugging her thin arms. It doesn't have to be. Eleanor took off her heavy emerald wrap and draped it around Clara's shoulders. Eleanor, no. This is worth thousands. Keep it. Eleanor grabbed Clara's hands. Come with me. Now. Where? Anywhere. There's a cottage on the edge of the estate. The old caretaker's place. It's empty. It has a fireplace. No one goes there. You're insane, Clara said, but she was smiling, a wild, terrified smile. I'm in love, Eleanor corrected. The words hung in the snowy air, crystallizing like the flakes around them. Clara stared at her, the snow catching in her eyelashes. Say it again, Clara whispered. I am in love with you, Clara. I don't want the estate. I don't want the legacy. I want you reading Wuthering Heights in my library at midnight. Clara let out a sob that turned into a laugh. She grabbed Eleanor's hand. Then let's go. They ran through the snow, hand in hand, leaving the lights of the manor behind. The cottage was cold and dusty, but Eleanor got a fire roaring in the hearth within minutes. They sat on the rug before the fire, the emerald wrap spread out beneath them. The storm howled outside, but in here, the firelight painted their skin in gold. I've never felt warm in that house, Eleanor confessed, tracing the line of Clara's jaw. Not once. You're warm now, Clara whispered. They lay together, the boundaries of class dissolving completely. There was no heiress, no maid. Just two women finding refuge in each other. Eleanor unpinned Clara's hair, watching it spill like dark water over the green velvet. She kissed her neck, her collarbone, murmuring promises of a future she hadn't dared to imagine until this moment. A future where they could leave Blackwood Manor, travel west, maybe to California, where no one knew the Blackwood name. "We could leave tonight," Eleanor said, looking down at Clara. "I have accounts my mother doesn't know about. We could drive to the city, take a flight." "You'd leave everything?" Clara asked, tracing Eleanor's lips with her thumb. "The money. The power." "It's not power, Clara. It's a cage. You are the only freedom I've ever known." Clara pulled her down for a kiss, deep and searing. It was a seal on a pact. They would run. They would escape. They fell asleep in each other's arms, the fire dying down to embers. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Blackwood slept without nightmares. Eleanor woke to the sound of a door slamming. Disoriented, she sat up. The fire was dead. The morning light was gray and harsh, filtering through the dirty windows of the cottage. "Clara," she called out, reaching for the space beside her. It was empty. Panic seized her. She scrambled up, straightening her crumpled velvet gown. "Clara!" The door to the cottage was wide open. Snow swirled into the room. Eleanor ran to the threshold. There were footprints leading away from the cottage. Not one set, but many. Heavy boot prints. And tire tracks. A black SUV was idling at the edge of the clearing, 100 yards away. Eleanor's heart stopped. She recognized the vehicle. It was the private security detail for the estate. And standing next to the car, wrapped in a pristine fur coat, stood Margaret Blackwood. Eleanor ran. She didn't care about the snow soaking her velvet shoes. She sprinted across the clearing, her breath tearing at her throat. "Mother!" she screamed. Margaret turned slowly. Her face was a mask of icy calm. 2 large security guards stood behind her. And between them, looking small and terrified, was Clara. Clara was holding a bag. Her eyes were red, swollen from crying. "Clara!" Eleanor lunged forward, but a guard stepped in her way, a wall of muscle. "Stand down, Eleanor," Margaret said, her voice cutting through the wind like a whip. "Let her go." Eleanor screamed, struggling against the guard. "What are you doing?" "I am cleaning up your mess," Margaret said coldly. "Did you really think I didn't know? Did you think you could disappear from the gala, my gala, and I wouldn't notice?" Margaret walked closer to Eleanor, her heels sinking into the snow. She looked at her daughter with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You have embarrassed this family, Eleanor, consorting with the help in a squalid hut like a commoner." "I love her!" Eleanor yelled, the truth ripping out of her. Margaret slapped her. The sound was sharp, echoing in the clearing. Eleanor reeled back, tasting blood. "You love nothing," Margaret hissed. "You are a Blackwood. You do not love, you acquire. And you do not acquire broken things." Margaret turned to Clara. "Get in the car." "No!" Eleanor shouted. "Clara, don't. Tell her. Tell her we're leaving." Clara looked up. Her face was pale, her expression shattered. She looked at Eleanor, and then at the terrifying figure of Margaret Blackwood. "Clara, please," Eleanor begged, tears streaming down her face. Clara took a shuddering breath. She looked Eleanor in the eye, and her voice was dead. "I'm sorry, Miss Blackwood. I made a mistake." Eleanor froze. "What?" "I made a mistake," Clara repeated, the words mechanical. "Your mother has been generous. She is giving me a severance. Enough to start over. Far away from here." "You took money?" Eleanor whispered, the betrayal hitting her harder than the slap. "I have to survive," Clara sobbed, her mask breaking for a second. "I told you. Ambition is a luxury for the wealthy. I can't fight them, Eleanor. I'm just a maid." "Get in the car," Margaret commanded again. This time, Clara obeyed. She climbed into the back seat of the black SUV, refusing to look back. "Mother, please." Eleanor grabbed Margaret's fur coat. "Don't send her away. I'll do anything. I'll marry the senator's son. I'll run the company exactly how you want. Just let her stay." Margaret pulled her arm away, dusting off the sleeve where Eleanor had touched her. "The deal is done, Eleanor. She took the check. She chose the money over you. Remember that. Margaret got into the car. The door slammed shut. Eleanor stood alone in the snow, in her ruined emerald gown. The engine roared to life. She watched as the car turned around, tires crunching over the pristine white snow, carrying away the only person who had ever made her feel real. As the car drove away, Eleanor saw a hand press against the back window. A palm, flat against the glass. Eleanor fell to her knees, the cold seeping into her bones. She watched the taillights fade into the mist of the Hudson Valley, leaving her alone in the vast, silent prison of her inheritance. The car disappeared around the bend. Eleanor stayed on her knees, the snow beginning to cover the emerald velvet, turning her, slowly, into a statue. But then, in the snow where the car had idled, she saw something. It was the book. Wuthering Heights. It must have fallen from Clara's bag when she was forced into the car. Eleanor crawled toward it. Her frozen fingers brushed the cover. She opened it. Inside the front cover, scribbled in pencil, was a note. It wasn't old. It was fresh. The graphite was smudged, written in haste, perhaps minutes ago while Clara waited for Eleanor to wake up before the guards dragged her out. I didn't take the money. I took the ticket she forced on me to keep you safe. Find me in the place where the cliffs meet the sea. I will wait forever. See. Eleanor stared at the note. Her tears stopped. The cold vanished, replaced by a white-hot fire in her chest. She stood up. She looked at the empty road where her mother had gone, believing she had won. Then she looked back at the manor, the looming stone beast that had controlled her life. Eleanor Blackwood turned her back on the house. She clutched the book to her chest and began to walk. Not toward the manor. Not toward her mother. She began to walk toward the garage where her own car and her own keys were waiting. She had a drive to make. To Newport,